Hello, Mike Kako. Happy New Year, everyone. I'm Mike Gabbard. I'm the chair of the Energy Environment Committee, and this is Rep. Chris Lee, chair of the House Energy Environmental Protection Committee. Also joining us from the Senate are Senator Sam Sloan, also Prickly Gualtieri, who also happen to be members of the E&E Committee.
Thank you. Great to be here. For the House, myself, Chair, Representative Lee, represent the Kailua-Waimanalo area. I've got this format that's still in my head for the conference that we're going with here. All right, let's put that aside. New Year. Anyway, Representative Lowen. Okay.
Oh, I'm Representative Lowen, District 6, and Vice Chair of EEP.
Okay. Just to make sure, this is an informational briefing to get an update on invasive species threats to Hawaii, and it's being co-hosted by the E&E committees in the Senate and also EP in the House. And just to make sure you're in the right room, last year we had a briefing, and at the very end, a guy came up to me. He was very upset because he was waiting for me to talk about medical marijuana. And when he found out that it was an invasive species, well, anyway, it's another story. So this is if you're here on invasive species, you're in the right room.
Ag Committee's next door.
Yeah. So we're going to be hearing from state departments, organizations who are tasked with implementing the programs for the prevention, control, research, and outreach for invasive species issues. And by the way, as many of you know in this room, it wasn't until I went up on a helicopter tour of the counties that I really got to understand what this issue is really all about. So I want to say thank you very much to the invasive species committees, the work that they do day in and day out, tracking down Albizia, Myconia, coconut rhinoceros beetles, little fire ants, coffee bearer borers, what else? Macnut, felted coccids, God knows what else, the list goes on. And actually, when I was talking with Taya and Lori from Maui, they had mentioned when they were out searching for Myconia that they got rained on by little fire ants, just to let you know the seriousness of what we're all about and doing what we're doing here today. So, plus I'd also like to thank the dedication of the Nature Conservancy, of course HISC, DLNR, Department of Ag, and also the Watershed Partnerships. Mahalo nui for all the work, the important work that you guys do. Folks, in short, we have to keep our eye on the ball on this issue. And just in the past few months, we've discovered 2 new invasive species that have the potential of wreaking havoc on our islands. Over on Maui in October, Maui Community College students found painted stink bugs in a garden. And these suckers, they feed on juices in all sorts of vegetables. And then you probably saw in the news recently about the coconut crab that can grow up to 3 feet long. That's right, 3 feet long. You may have seen them on the evening news, one of those critters taking a stroll down Salt Lake Boulevard right before Christmas. Professor Rob Tonin, a UH professor, has this to say about coconut crabs, and I quote, "They'll raid people's trash cans, eat native birds, eat juvenile plants, and tear up the landscape if they're here. They grab a hold of things, can rip them open, can bust open a coconut, and the idea of that crawling around in their backyard is not going to be very pleasant for many people here in Hawaii," unquote. So today's hearing will be televised on Channel 53 on Oahu and will also be live streamed at olelo.org. Last session, Rep. Lee and I, we closely worked together to get $5 million in appropriation. Act 102, it passed, to the Hawaii Invasive Species Council, into the joint majority package. We were incredibly stoked that it sailed through, had the governor's blessings from the very beginning, and this session I'm once again making invasive species one of my top priorities. I'll be putting forth legislation that will direct additional funding to Department of Ag of $2 million and also to HISC $6 million in both the next 2 fiscal years, 2015-16 and also 16 and 17, so that they can continue this fight. And also this bill will direct LRB to update the filling the gaps in the fight against invasive species. That was the 2002 study, to provide a current assessment and recommendations to invasive species in our state. So, Rep. Lee, if you'd like to say it.
Thank you. I'd just like to expand on that. It has been fantastic to work together with the Senate on some of these issues, and obviously we've got our work cut out for us. But the 2002 study that Senator Gabbard's talking about estimated that it cost approximately $50 million a year of investment from the state to be able to adequately manage and tackle the invasive species at hand. $50 million a year. And that's something that we have not got even close to. So it is a testament to the folks who've been working at the HISCs, at the county levels, and at the state to manage this problem with so much fewer resources than that was estimated. And it's amazing the things that we've been able to so far do together. Obviously, we've got a long way to go. So I think updating this figure to figure out what the real cost is going to be if we really want to tackle this will help give us a little bit better perspective on the priorities and the funding that should be coming forward this year.
Good. Okay, so we'll get started. We're going to start with an overview of the invasive species problem in Hawaii with Mark Fox, Director of External Affairs for the Nature Conservancy of Hawaii. Welcome, Mark. Aloha.
Aloha and good morning. Thank you, chairs and senators and representatives. Really a pleasure to be back with you. I had a good holiday and I hope you did too. I come face to face with a couple of coconut crabs where they're supposed to be, and they are truly impressive animals, not here. I've seen them on Palmyra Atoll, and they are beautiful and amazing, and they are becoming more rare in other places in the Pacific. They're delicious. But we don't need them here, and they would indeed wreak havoc here.
Especially on Salt Lake Boulevard.
Exactly. Yeah. Imagine what that would do to your tire. I also, just quickly before I get started, I want to share with Chair Gabbard, if I can, and I made some additional copies. Coincidentally, the front page or the cover article in Hawaii Business this month is about the value of nature, and some really interesting assessment by some of our top economists at the University of Hawaii about what nature is worth in Hawaii, how you put an economic value on it, what happens what it costs if you don't take care of it, and what the return on investment for going ahead and trying to work to prevent and control things like an invasive species. So bring that to your attention. I'll make sure that copies of that get delivered to every legislator's office in the next day or so. But a very interesting article, and I hope you take a moment to look at it. Stepping into my role today, I'm just going to give you a quick overview on invasive species. In Hawaii. I'll go through it quickly because most of you are already akamai about this and know what's going on. I want to especially thank Christy Martin, who often sits in this chair and gives you this overview. I think she's downstairs watching the briefing, budget briefing for the Ag Department, and none of us would be able to do the kind of work that we do without the exceptional outreach and help that we get from Christy, and she helped me put this slide presentation together. What if we do it here? So this is sort of the stereotypical view that a lot of people have of Hawaii. Sun, sand, palm trees. What a lot of us, even those of us who live here, don't really realize is there is this amazing ecological amplitude in Hawaii. We have got over 10,000 native plants and animals. More than 90% of them are found nowhere else on the earth. Took thousands of years for these plants and animals to get here. They came on ocean currents and on the wind, and over thousands of years, a few of them became established: seeds, birds, fish, those kinds of things. And they created this really amazing set of balanced ecosystems that give us all kinds of benefits that we sort of take for granted every day: fresh water, recreation, food, culture. They're the backbone and part of our tourism industry. And they're pretty good at uptaking carbon and absorbing water and delivering it into streams and aquifers. So before humans came here, about 1,500 years ago, this is what the landscape looked like in Hawaii. Native habitats from the very tops of the mountains all the way out onto the coral reef. And about 1,500 years ago, when humans first arrived, that started sort of this process of altering the land. There's nothing wrong with that. That's what we do. We need to survive, and we're part of the ecosystem too. But over 1,500 years, this is kind of the evolution of our footprint in Hawaii. And give you a sense, native habitat, top of the mountain, out to the reef. The pink you see there is now altered habitat across the state. And that's us, developing areas, developing agriculture, those kinds of things. And so what's happened is this map shows how sort of our native areas, in particular native forests, have sort of retreated to the uplands. The greatest threat today, well, historically it was development and human alteration. So the greatest threat today are invasive plants and animals and diseases that are coming in and impacting our native systems, impacting our agriculture, impacting the quality of life that we experience here in Hawaii. So, you know, some of our poster children up here that we're all becoming more and more familiar with, Albizia on the top left, coconut rhinoceros beetle, the top right. That's fireweed that is impacting pastures all over the state. Fortunately, with the great work of the Department of Agriculture and the U.S. Forest Service, have found a biocontrol that's helping to manage the fireweed problem. And then, of course, one of our biggest evildoers, little fire ant, there on the bottom right. This is an older image, but just gives you a sense of vessel traffic in the Pacific. So. Global economy makes for easy movement of pests all over the world, and you can see us smack dab in the middle of that there. As you know, invasive species already cost us in the neighborhood of $500 million a year in agricultural loss, economic damage, things like that, and again, some of our favorite pests here that you're very familiar with and that have already been mentioned today. Estimates, some of that kind of analysis is in the Hawaii Business article in front of you today, but estimates are if, you know, some of these things spread more or become, new things become established, we can expect much greater costs. So already little fire ant on the Big Island is estimated to cost somewhere in the neighborhood of about $130 million a year in damage to crops and other impacts. Brown tree snake has been estimated if it, and that's our good friend Neil Reimer, downstairs on Guam, capturing a snake from the Department of Agriculture. Estimated if brown tree snake became established here in Hawaii and widespread, probably about $2 billion in economic losses. Those things love to crawl up power lines, cause power outages, get into transformers. So economic loss and lost productivity, as well as medical treatment from bites from those things in the range of $2 billion is estimated to be the cost of Hawaii if we got those here. That's alien algae choking a reef in Kaneohe Bay at low tide. Also in the Hawaii Business article that I have in front of you, it profiles a couple of studies about what the economic value of our healthy reefs are here in Hawaii in terms of food provision, protecting us and our shorelines from erosion and high wave events, and not to mention the visitor economy that virtually 75 or 85% of every visitor that comes to Hawaii engages in some sort of economic activity. So when we have alien algae choking our reefs, that can be a real burden on that value of that reef, or those reefs. This is an example of what a healthy native forest looks like. This is East Maui. This is what that exact same location looks like when it's overrun by invasive animals. And you can imagine it doesn't do a very good job of capturing and absorbing rainwater and slowly putting it into aquifers and streams when it looks like that. These healthy forests, like I said, this is a source of our fresh water. It's not the tap when you turn it on. It's not even really the well that we tap into or the stream. First, it has to hit the forest, get absorbed by that forest, and delivered into systems for our use. Just going to wrap up here and remind all of us that addressing this problem takes a really consistent and well-funded multi-tiered approach. First, preventing new stuff from coming in at our borders. That's our colleagues at the Department of Ag Plant Quarantine Division. That's our colleagues at the U.S. Department of Agriculture Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service. That's them with inspectors and the proper equipment and laws to address prevention. That's them working with other locations on compliance agreements to prevent stuff from coming in. Second tier is if stuff slips through, early detection and rapid response. Again, colleagues like the Department of Ag and the ISC getting out there and trying to get after stuff before it becomes widespread. For things that do become widespread, the next step, good solid containment and control. Try to prevent things from growing and becoming bigger problems. And lastly, all of this is supported by a really strong foundation of good, sound science, so that we have the techniques and the technologies available to all of us to use to address the problem, and solid outreach and education to the community. So wrap it up with that. Nothing you guys haven't heard or know about, but thanks for giving me the opportunity to give you a reminder and kick us off this morning.
Any questions? We'd like to welcome also Senator Josh Green and also Representative Cynthia Field.
And Representative Say.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let's see, Representative Say.
Just wanted to follow up just briefly on the water loss. I mean, obviously, there's going to be an impact here considering we're already expecting to lose water from climate change, changes of trade winds. But has there been, to your knowledge, any sort of metrics, dollar figures placed on that economically from the water side?
Yeah, soon. So two things have happened. Dr. Tom Jambaluka from the UH Geology Department has a few sites on the Big Island in particular where he's been measuring water infiltration and evapotranspiration. That's basically the water cycle in areas infested by strawberry guava versus native ohia forest, and is seeing that you get a lot more water capture from native forest as compared to strawberry guava. He agrees we need to do more studies and extrapolate that across more landscapes. There is a discussion in the Hawaii Business article about Dr. Kim Burnett, who is focusing recently on Hawaii Island and doing some more of that economic analysis of how much water is produced or saved by natural resource conservation work, fencing, animal control, weed control. When she gets back from her sabbatical in Japan, she's going to do a little piece of work for the Nature Conservancy to take that analysis on the Big Island and focus in on our two preserves on the Big Island and Kona, South Kona and Ka'u, and tell us particularly for those areas, for the amount of money we've invested in fencing, animal control, weed control, what's the estimate of water savings or additional water occurring, and what's the economic value of that water in those locations. Some might argue, well, water's not that valuable in Ka'u because there's not that much agriculture going on. Maybe more valuable in South Kona. What we're hoping to do is come up with a bit of a model that we can then take to other locations, Maui, Oahu, and get you some harder numbers about, if you save X gallons of water by investing this much in a fencing project in the Ko'olaus, that water is going to be worth Y as compared to going to desalination. So, apologize for the long-winded answer. We are trying to get to that.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Mark, what is your personal view on what it's going to look like in terms of invasive species 20 to 30 years from now?
Yeah.
And appreciate your candor.
I am trying to remain optimistic like you are because of the people in this room and including yourselves really recognizing that this is an issue that is not just about environmentalists and those of us who are tree huggers, and that this is, while there is intrinsic value in our Hawaiian Islands and the resources we have here, it's also critically tied to our economy and our quality of life and the health and well-being of people here. And so there's a willingness I see from you folks and from the folks in this room to keep at it. That being said, we're in trouble if we don't figure out how to, start getting ahead of this curve. And as I mentioned with some of the costs in my presentation and some of the analysis you'll see in that article, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. The millions of dollars we can find from the state, from federal partners, from foundations, from counties to help invest in addressing this problem can save us tens and even hundreds of millions of dollars if we let these things become established here.
All right. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next we have an overview of resources for invasive species. Josh Atwood, who's the Invasive Species Coordinator with DLNR Division of Forestry and Wildlife.
Good morning, Chairs Gabbard and Lee, Senators and Representatives. Thanks for having me today.
First, congratulations on the birth of your new son.
Yes, thank you. He's 2 weeks old, and so if I say anything incorrect today, it's because I'm overtired, and so I think we can all agree I get a free pass on correct answers.
Okay.
So as Mark just really eloquently described, the issue of invasive species is a really complex one. And what I'm going to talk about a little bit is how the state manages this problem that is not, it doesn't fall under the mandate of any one department or agency. And the state legislature recognized this when it created the Hawaii Invasive Species Council in 2003. So the HISC is made up of these 6 state departments, which the legislature decided have the most relationship to the invasive species problem. Department of Ag, DLNR, Health, Transportation, Business, Economic Development and Tourism, and the University of Hawaii. So each of these departments has core programs that are related to the invasive species issue, and they're connected to one another through the HISC for cabinet level coordination. But they all have their own funding sources for these core efforts. So I'm just going to kind of walk through some of these and then talk about how the HISC fits in on top of that. But it's really important to kind of prioritize these core efforts, the base infrastructure of the invasive species mechanism for the state to deal with this problem. So just starting with Department of Agriculture, some of their core programs that you'd be familiar with, and we're going to have people talking in much more detail from the department later in this briefing, are functions like inspection and quarantine. Those are pre-border and border protection, as well as emergency response to pests that have gotten past the border here in Hawaii. And so there are really critical funding sources for those efforts, including the barrel tax or the cargo fee, as well as contributions from the general fund on an annual basis. At DLNR, some of the core programs are, of course, Forestry and Wildlife, and also the Division of Aquatic Resources. So looking to the 25% of state lands that the department manages, or 25% of the land mass in Hawaii that falls under the department's management responsibilities, and looking at what are the resources in those forests, what are the wildlife resources of the state, and also in our nearshore waters, how are we protecting our coral reefs and our native aquatic species. And one of the key funding sources for this kind of work is the conveyance tax on the sale of property, which goes into, a portion of which goes into the Natural Area Reserve Fund at DLNR. And of course, the department also relies on portions of the general fund. At Department of Health, their connection to the invasive species problem is that they're responsible for the management of disease vectors. They, of course, used to have the vector control branch, which was lost around 2009 with a reduction in force. There are some vector control workers left, but nowhere near the 40-some personnel that used to deal with disease vectors, including mosquitoes, which can carry malaria, yellow fever, chikungunya, etc. And they also have an environmental health branch that looks at permitting processes and the protection of clean water. They receive funds from the barrel tax as well, and general fund appropriations. The connection between the Hawaii Department of Transportation and invasive species is that this is the agency that is mandated to manage our transportation hubs, air, sea, and land. So they receive funds from federal aviation as well as federal highways and state general funds to make sure that these points of entry and points of transportation around the state are well managed and hopefully are not vectors for invasive species, or at least that we're mitigating the potential for invasive species to be moved through air and seaports. For DBET, they're of course in charge of tourism and planning, and as Mark more eloquently described than I will right now, tourism in Hawaii is based in large part on our natural environment and making sure that we are preserving the valuable environments that people come here to see. So they come to the Invasive Species Council with planning expertise from the Office of Planning to work with other agencies on how to best address impacts from invasive species on our environmental resources that are valuable to our economy. And some of their critical funding sources are listed there. And the University of Hawaii is, of course, our main academic research institution in the state. Their cooperative extension services work with people throughout the state on issues where they might be impacted by invasive species. They work with farmers who are dealing with pests. in their croplands. And they also manage the Pacific Cooperative Studies Unit that's under the Botany Department. And they have some of the projects that you're familiar with, such as the Invasive Species Committees or the Watershed Partnerships, that are doing a lot of the work that falls in between gaps or in between mandates for different agencies in the state. So these are the 6 state departments that are mandated to deal with some portion of the invasive species problem. And then coming in on top of that, you have the Interagency Hawaii Invasive Species Council. So the HISC is comprised of these 6 directors of those different departments, and they provide interagency coordination and collaboration on invasive species issues that do not fall under just one department. And each year we come to the legislature asking for interagency HISC funds, and those are in addition to funding for those core programs you see there. They're for things that fill gaps between agencies, such as the Invasive Species Committee's work with incipient or new invasive species that doesn't really fall under the mandate of either DLNR or Department of Agriculture. And it's also an opportunity for us to prioritize on an annual basis what new research or innovative projects need to be done to move our efforts against invasive species forward. And I'll talk about some of what has been funded this past year. So part of the HISC's mandate under Chapter 194 of Hawaii Revised Statutes is to identify agency resource shortfalls. So as part of our legislative report that we produce on an annual basis, we talk to different agencies and ask them, what are your resource shortfalls for dealing with invasive species? So just quickly, we're going to go through, for each department, they provided a response for us preparing this legislative report this year. So for Department of Agriculture, filling vacancies and adding positions is something that they're continuing to work on. Something that would really be helpful is looking at new ways to provide a temp or emergency hiring process for dealing with invasive species emergencies. And of course, updating our biocontrol facilities. And we'll have more information on that later in the hearing. Our biocontrol section chief is here to talk about how the facilities in Hawaii really need to be updated before we can make progress on biocontrol efforts, which is one of our most cost-effective ways of dealing with established invasive species. Under DLNR, some of our resource shortfalls are technicians to do forestry and wildlife work across the state at the district offices for Division of Forestry and Wildlife. Sustained funding for watershed protection, whether it's through CIP funding for fence construction to keep out invasive ungulates, or special and general funds to fund some of the staff that do that work. Looking at an increased conveyance tax allocation coming from the sale of properties into the Natural Area Reserve Fund, or increasing the ceiling for the Natural Area Reserve Fund, since a lot of revenues have been coming in through the healthy sale of property in the state, but the cap on what we can spend is lower than the actual revenues that are coming in. So increasing that ceiling would go a long ways to helping with some of these watershed projects. And HISC funds, even though it's interagency, the HISC is administered by the Department of Land and Natural Resources. So the 3 HISC support staff, we all sit at DLNR. We work with all the agencies, but that's the administrative program that we fall under. So each year we come to the legislature asking for a general fund contribution for helping some of these interagency efforts. Under Department of Health, one of their resource shortfalls is restoring some of that vector control capacity. They're not looking to restore the entire vector control branch, but I think each year for the last 2 years, they've requested the restoration of 4 vector control worker positions, which would help monitor mosquitoes and other vectors of human diseases. And I believe they'll be requesting that again this year. Under Department of Transportation, one of their resource shortfalls is support for emergency responses to events that impact roadways after disasters. So, of course, Hurricane Iselle and the massive fall of albizia trees on the Big Island is a great example of ways that if there was an emergency response mechanism for Department of Transportation to work on some of these issues related to invasives, they could help get their infrastructure up and running faster. Under DBET, some of their resource shortfalls are planning staff. They're looking at expanding what they're working on currently with invasive species efforts, trying to be more collaborative with other agencies, and also working on a lot of climate initiatives as well as aquatics. The Ocean Resource Management Plan falls under their Office of Planning, and so having the staff to work on those efforts is something that they're looking for this year. And under UH, because the university budget is a little bit different from other agencies, they didn't have any specific line items that they're looking for in the admin package, but they do of course have needs. Primary one that I mentioned earlier is that the Pacific Cooperative Studies Unit exists under the UH Department of Botany, and they rely on a lot of things like competitive HISC funds. A lot of their research projects that are not necessarily under PCSU, but under the Office of Research Services, rely on competitive HISC funds each year. And then, as I mentioned, HISC funds come in on top of these funded core efforts. What the HISC is looking for this year is, one, an update to the 2002 LRB study, which Senator Gabbard mentioned earlier. That study is fantastic. It's really thorough. If you haven't read it, it still exists in the state archives, and it's a really good multi-sector analysis of what the state has and what the state needs for dealing with the invasive species problem. But of course, 13 years later, we're looking at a very different landscape, and having updated numbers and an updated analysis by the same group would be really valuable. We're also asking to maintain project capacity that was built through the legislature's investment in fiscal year 2015. As Senator Gabbard mentioned, there was the $5 million appropriation under Act 102 last year, and there was also $750,000 that had been provided at the start of the FY14, FY15 biennium. So the HISC's competitive grant budget last year was actually $5.75 million. So we're looking to maintain that number. We've rounded it up to $6 million because we actually received $10.4 million in requests for those funds. We're not asking for $10.4 million. We know money is scarce, but we would love to maintain the progress that's currently ongoing, and we have ever-increasing overhead costs and things like that. So $6 million would be what we estimate is needed to not lose some of the progress of what we've worked on now. So you might be wondering where that $5.75 million went. I'm going to go through this really briefly. This is also in our legislative report if you want to review it in more detail. But we awarded 42 awards this year, and these are all just getting going. The encumbrance process takes about 6 months, so these funds are just now starting to be spent. But you can see about half of it, sorry, I'm going to switch over to the laser pointer here. About half here is spent on county-specific detection and control projects. A lot of that is through the invasive species committees or watershed partnerships. And that's looking at detection and control of new invasive plants or animals that we think we can really make a difference by investing a lot of effort in now. Some of the other areas that the HISC budget goes to: invasive ant and coconut rhinoceros beetle emergency response. Those are interagency response efforts that are led by the Department of Agriculture, but there's a lot of involvement from DLNR staff or invasive species committee staff. So we provide some of the money to get the boots on the ground. We're also providing funding for a pilot program for detector dogs for enhanced little fire ant detection, which will drastically increase our efficiency in finding little fire ants at infested properties or in infested shipments. We also fund efforts to manage axis deer on Maui Island and to eradicate axis deer from Hawaii Island after the illegal introduction in 2009. And we've dispatched 4 deer so far from Hawaii Island and have not been able to detect any more in over a year. So it's a sign that we're meeting our goals there. We also fund statewide outreach, which Mark mentioned in the last presentation. This includes the statewide broadcast of the Little Fire Ant video that many of you probably saw. It was first released about a year ago. It's constantly being updated because we keep finding fire ants around the state. But we're going to be broadcasting that statewide this year. And then I also mentioned that the HISC is a source of funds for new and innovative data and technology projects. So that includes things like developing unmanned aerial survey tools so that we can save money on trying to map and detect new invasive plant populations. Developing new techniques such as herbicide ballistic technology, which some of you have had the opportunity to experience. It's where we fire paintballs filled with a very small amount of herbicide out of a helicopter to areas that we can't reach by foot. And then we also fund new biocontrol work by state and federal offices. So that's kind of where the money went this year. And if we're awarded funds again in FY16, a lot of those funds will go to continuing to support ongoing progress. These are they tend not to be projects that you can fund for a year and then you've checked that off your list. As long as Hawaii continues to be a hub for transportation and tourism, these are things that we're going to have to deal with on an ongoing basis. Over in this corner, you can see the amount of requests that we received and then kind of a breakdown of where the money went to the different agencies. And the vast majority of these go to UH because, as I mentioned, we're dealing with research projects and things that are really innovative, so it's not necessarily funding those core programs that we talked about earlier. So that's kind of a brief overview of our state mechanism for dealing with invasive species across different agencies. You'll get much more detail from the other presenters that are going to come up after me, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Josh, you were saying it's competitive. The money that was allocated after last year, it goes to HISC, and it's a competitive process. So the directors from each of those 60, they sit down and they say, okay, based on the proposals, this is where the money's going. Is that the process?
That's exactly right. Okay. So the HISC is one mechanism the legislature can use. The legislature has and continues to rightly appropriate funds directly to issues that are of special concern to the legislature. Last year there was money for coffee berry borer, the macadamia nut felted coxid. And so the legislature does not need to utilize the HISC, but it's a mechanism set up by the legislature to provide money to these 6 State Department directors to annually prioritize what they feel is the most important way to utilize these funds. So all 6 of them sit down, we provide them with a recommended budget, and they amend or approve it.
Any other questions?
Just one quick follow-up. Obviously, I think we're all proud to have been a part of funding the efforts last year to put money toward a lot of these things, but that's really, it sounds like according to the last study, we need 9 times more every year. Realistically, what does the study update going to amend that to? Is there a ballpark for how much more we're talking about?
Without the study having been done or having been updated, updating that ballpark number, I guess, kind of shows what's changed in the last 13 years. It doesn't mean that we are necessarily going to be asking for 50 million or 150 million, whatever that number comes to, but it shows us kind of with 13 years of not meeting that goal, does the overall cost of addressing invasive species in Hawaii, have we been able to reduce that, or has it grown exponentially because we're not meeting our annual management goals? The LRB study also provides a lot of information other than just estimating the amount needed each year to address invasive species issues. It talks about the programs that are at each agency, the ways they are or are not meeting their mandates, and it provides recommendations for how to better address invasive species. So one of the outcomes of the last report was the creation of the HISC, the legislation that came to the legislature was informed largely by the LRB study. So this is an opportunity for the LRB to look at what we've accomplished, what we've set up as a mechanism in the last 13 years, and say, can we be doing better?
Anyone else?
Sure.
Rick?
Thank you. Josh, thanks for coming. I noticed that and you fly at 30,000 feet, I understand that. But I may not be here when the specific departments come up. The vector control. They're going to ask for 4 positions, but that doesn't come close to how they operated before. Now, I represent the urban core, and we got problem with rats. Has that problem gone down? So because now we don't need that many people or that many inspectors?
Yeah, I don't have numbers off the top of my head. I would not guess that the rat problem has gone down since the reduction in vector control in 2009.
And we're asking for less guys, though.
Right. So what's happened with the remaining vector control workers is that instead of being their own branch, they've been subsumed under health and sanitation. So certainly one option for the legislature to consider is reinstating the whole branch. Otherwise, it falls under the duties of the manager for health and sanitation branch with a certain number of workers that are specifically tasked for dealing with things like rats and mosquitoes.
Okay.
So bringing back 4 increases their capacity somewhat, but it's certainly not the same as bringing back an actual manager for a fully functional vector control branch.
I see. So we should be talking directly with the department about that.
That's right.
You're suggesting it. Okay. Yeah, but then secondly, very quickly, Chair, thank you. I noticed throughout the urban core, maybe not only in the downtown area or the South Shore, I noticed a lot of what looks like bird feeders. And you may not know the answer to this, but they look the same everywhere I go. They're like huge birds. Is this a part of the invasive species initiative, and what are they?
It is, yeah. Those are traps for coconut rhinoceros beetle.
Oh.
So we're going to have the incident commander for the coconut rhinoceros beetle response effort speaking in a little bit. But what those are, they're vein traps that have a pheromone lure in them. And so if there are beetles moving out of the infested area, those are a detection method for making sure that we know where they are on the island. So they're everywhere. I've seen them up in Mokuleia.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much, Josh.
Thank you.
Get some sleep. Your eyes
Thanks.
are kind of bloodshot. Next up, we have the Hawaii Invasive Species Council is going for some remarks.
Yes. Aloha and mahalo for organizing this briefing for us today. I'm going to keep it very brief because we really want to get to the incredible wealth of information that we have in the room today and our presenters. So we just wanted to take a quick opportunity
Can you first
to
identify yourself?
Yes, sorry, Emily Montgomery with the Hawaii Invasive Species Council. Just take a brief opportunity on behalf of the support staff of the council to thank the agencies and the leaders and the chairs on our council for being incredibly supportive of this work and all of our partners. And then to thank the you guys, the representatives and senators, for really the huge push we got last year and the amount of support, and hoping to work with you to continue that forward. And lastly, just again, huge and sincere thanks to all of the partners in the room who are going to now come and present this information to you today. They're really the reason they make everything happen. So, we can help support them, and anything we can do is really critical for that. But these folks we're going to hear from now are really make the difference in getting the work done. So, mahalo nui loa.
Thanks, Emily. Okay, we're going to hear from Amy Takahashi, the Acting Chief of the Department of Ag's Plant Industry Division, Plant Quarantine Branch. Aloha, Amy.
Good morning, chairs and members of the committee. I am Amy Takahashi. I carry 2 hats. I am the Inspection Compliance Chief and also the Acting Branch Manager for Plant Quarantine. I would also like to introduce to you Glenn Sakamoto, to my left. He is the Plant Quarantine Outreach and Education Specialist who brought some specimens for you to see today. For example, coconut rhinoceros beetle, CRB, coffee berry borer, CBB, and fire ant, as well as imported fire ant. Old pests, such as the brown tree snake, is here for you to see today. Okay, I just want to start off with a brief overview of the Plant Quarantine Branch. And my topic is border inspection, but I equate that with import and interstate inspections as well. Okay, so as an introduction, the importation of plants, including the non-propagative materials such as flowers, produce, and all animals. That's the reptiles, amphibians, birds, fishes and shellfish, including cultures of microorganisms and soil, require inspection upon entry, either through the airports or seaports. Shipments coming from the U.S. are considered domestic shipments, and that's the primary agency for that is Plant Quarantine. As for foreign shipments, The primary agency for inspection is the USDA Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service. Plant Quarantine's mission is 1, prevent the introduction of illegal plants and animals and harmful pests. And we also do the prevention on the spread of these harmful organisms from one island to another. And we also facilitate export clearances of horticultural materials to other states and countries. Plant Quarantine's authority comes from Chapter 158, Hawaii Revised Statutes, also known as the Hawaii Plant Quarantine Law, and 5 Hawaii Administrative Rules, Chapter 4-70 Plant Import Rules, 471 Non-Domestic Animals Import Rules, 471 Microorganism Import Rules, 472 Plant Interstate Rules, and Chapter 473 Plant Export Rules. All of these commodities that we regulate need to come in through approved port of entry designated by the Board of Agriculture. And right now, Honolulu is the only full port of entry, meaning that all plant material, animals, microorganisms, all can come through the port of Honolulu. The other ports on the other islands on Kauai, Maui, and the Big Island are what we call limited port of entry. So these ports can only receive plant material, cut flowers, and for Kona, seafoods. And this is pretty much based on the amount of manpower that we have for these ports. This table is just to illustrate to you our inspector staff statewide. Honolulu, and I separated the numbers, 29 represent 29 line inspectors, 11 specialist positions, including supervisors, which total 40 positions. We have 15 vacancies for Honolulu. For Hilo, we have 10 current positions, no vacancies. Kona, we have 3 positions, 0 vacancies. On Maui, we have 18 positions with 5 vacancies. On Kauai, 2 positions and no vacancies. So currently we have 73 positions with 20 positions vacant, totaling 93 positions for plant quarantine. Due to the limited number of staffing, we have limited number of inspections. So right now we have no night shift for Honolulu and Maui. We have very limited inspections for intrastate commodities, no inspection of private yacht as well as private aircrafts, and we have very limited monitoring of air passengers. And to illustrate what happens with our inter-island or intrastate movement of commodities, this is to just show you what our maritime statistics look like. And this was for Young Brothers. In 2012, we did less than 50 inspections for the whole year. For 2013, we did a little bit more than 20 inspections, and 2014, a little above 20. Due to the shortage of inspectors and the news of new pests moving between the states, and for example, the LFA and now the coffee berry borer, the plant quarantine used federal funds to do an increased inspection specifically for the LFA to determine LFA commodities that to determine the different commodities that are infested with LFA, determine how LFA infested commodities are moving between islands, and also to conduct LFA outreach and education. For this project, air and sea shipments were checked. Inspections were based on available manpower, and any LFA shipments that was found was either returned or destroyed. And in cooperation with the Plant Pest Control Branch, we did trace forwards and trace back. That enabled us to do some education and outreach for both shippers and consignees of infested shipments. We only have partial data for the LFA inspection. Right now we have for Maui, for the plants that are inspected, we did not see any LFA. Cut flowers, we only saw 2 shipments. produce, we only saw 2 shipments. For Kona, no plants were found to have LFA. Cut flowers, just 1 shipment out of 128. And for produce, 2 shipments out of 490. In light of these problems with the interstate movement of LFAs and coffee berry borer, as well as coqui frog, the department is proposing a intrastate compliance agreement. This is a bill that we want to propose for this legislation. Commercial and consignor and consignee participation is needed in this compliance program. What it is to get an agreement among both consignors and consignees to make sure that clean material are moving between the islands. And we are hoping to achieve this through a pest management program using best management practices and approved treatments, which is currently being researched by the Hawaii Ant Lab and Dr. Arnold Hara with the University of Hawaii, and through regular monitoring by plant quarantine. Implementation of the interstate compliance program will require additional staffing. For Hilo, we need a master journeyman, which is a shift supervisor. Kona, we're not requesting for any supervisor. Maui, requesting for 1, Honolulu 1, and none for Kauai. Inspectors are needed for Hilo, Kona, Maui, Honolulu, and 1 for Kauai. We also have technicians on board with our program. Currently, right now, we have about 15 technician positions in Hilo and Honolulu. We would need an additional 4 in Hilo, 1 in Kona, 2 in Maui, and 3 in Honolulu. The numbers in parentheses are the minimum numbers that we can utilize to maintain this program. So the question is, what's next? Because we've gotten pretty serious pests. And according to our entomologist, it's going to be the brown marmorated stink bug, which has over 100 plant hosts documented. Brown marmorated stink bug was intercepted 4 times in Hawaii. However, only once on an agricultural commodity. Major crop pests are peppers, soybeans, tomatoes, corn, cabbages, cucumbers, beans, peas, and eggplants. It causes hundreds of millions of dollars in crop damage annually. Increased insecticide use will not adequately control this pest. Introduction will likely be from non-agricultural products. Currently reported in 41 states, including California. So as a close, I'd like to report that the prevention of invasive species entering Hawaii really depends on all of us, not just the Department of Agriculture, but yourselves, the IS groups, and the public as well, and industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amy. Amy, what keeps you up awake at night? In what you do, what is the
Besides the coqui frog.
besides
Yeah.
that?
It's the challenge actually to try to think of how we can be more efficient as plant quarantine and preventing our states from all these pests coming into the state. Right now, as you saw right there, we have a shortage of inspectors. We have 8 positions in the supervisory position and the specialist position that are doing temporary assignments. So that means they're doing dual duties. So it's about how we can be more cost effective. And right now we're thinking, we need our e-manifest program set up so that we can look at what's coming into the state, screen what needs to be prioritized, and hit those commodities first so we can utilize our manpower most efficiently.
Thank you. Colleagues, any questions? Thank you very much, Amy.
Thank you.
Next is Derek Arakaki, Mechanical Control Specialist with the Plant Industry Division.
He's actually not here.
Oh, he's not. Okay.
I'm Rob Curtis. I'm with the Department of Agriculture. I'm currently the Coconut Rhinoceros Beetle Incident Commander, former Little Fire Ant Incident Commander for the Department of Ag. Before that, I was the Kona entomologist. I guess technically I'm still the Kona entomologist. I'm on detail here for these programs. So I'm here to talk about our early detection and rapid response program. This slide is an example of basically what we do when we find a pest that's become established or on its way to becoming established. It's basically a very simple three-step process. When we detect it, the next thing we do is we try to map it. So that's delimiting. And then after that, we make our decision whether it can be eradicated or controlled, or whether it's too widespread to actually do anything, and then we go into a different type of response, which would be more like biological control. And we are often responding to multiple pests at a time because here in Hawaii, things come in multiples. And whenever possible, we'll partner with other agencies such as the ISCs and USDA, other partners, to help us with these responses. And this list of pests is just an example of the various things that are already in the state, but not on every island, or that we're expecting to show up in the state at some point. So you can see our list is pretty long, and this is not at all comprehensive. So one of our case studies, a recent case study, is the coconut rhinoceros beetle. Last year, December 23rd, 2013, we found our first beetle in a trap, and by early January, we set up a unified incident command for this right after we found a breeding site. We started delimiting surveys, and those big black bird feeders that the Senator talked about, those are our traps. That's one of the three components of our delimiting surveys. We have about 2,700 of those up on the island of Oahu. We have some on the other islands as well. What we found is they're pretty much restricted to the southern and central part of Oahu, mostly around the Joint Base. And we started destroying some of the known breeding sites. There's 9 known breeding sites. I believe we have 2 left to destroy that are in the process of being destroyed right now. But we don't have a lot of tools for getting rid of a new insect. And that's pretty common with a new introduction, is that we've never seen it before, and no one's ever really had to deal with it on the scale that we need to here in Hawaii. So as with most of our early detection and rapid response programs, there's not a lot of tools, 1 for detection and 2 for the response itself. For this past year, we received $2.8 million from the USDA to assist us. We had $700,000 from the Department of Ag, and from the HISC, $425,000. The military has also allocated $2 million of their own dollars for the response on the military base. And in terms of what our needs are, we have a sustained need for funding. We're in an eradication program, and as Mark talked about, prevention is a lot cheaper than control and eradication. So we estimate that we need a minimum of $3 million annually to maintain an eradication program, and that eradication program could easily go for 10 or more years. I have about 45 staff working for me right now on this, and that's what I consider minimal for an eradication. On the Little Fire Ant program, we detected that the same day as coconut rhinoceros beetle in 2013. And that was at a garden shop. It was found on Hapu'u, coming from the Big Island. And in a couple days after that, we found it at several more retail stores. And in mid-January, we set up another incident command for that with multiple other agencies. One of the differences between that pest and coconut rhinoceros beetle is we couldn't get federal funding for it because it's not considered federally actionable. So everyone of all the different agencies basically had to scramble and use up their own time and resources to respond to it. In April, we found another established population in Waimanalo, and we began delimiting that immediately. We found that it was over only a few acres, and we were able to begin an eradication program for that site through multiple treatments, which will last over a year.
Thanks.
You're welcome. In Mililani, we found another infestation in a residential area. That one's a little bit larger and more complex because it's a residential area. But we did delimit that site, and we began treatments for eradication there too. Now on Oahu, we expect, and actually the other islands, we expect that there's more places where there's little fire ant that we haven't found yet. One of the more recent ones that was found was on Maui, and I understand that they are still trying to find some of the edges of that, but it's extremely large, and probably the most complex of all the LFA sites for control. Year one, combined with all the agencies, all the time that people have put in, is about $400,000. And like I said before, that's not with any allocated money. That's just people donating their time, basically. For moving into the future, we estimate we need about $1 million annually for the state. I personally, and these numbers for Little Fire Ant are coming from Derek's group, who I turned the project over to. Personally, I think that's modest for a pest like Little Fire Ant, because it has such wide-ranging effects on everything that we do here in Hawaii. They also identified that they needed dedicated funding going to the Hawaii Ant Lab on a regular basis, because not only are they doing research, but they're also doing a lot of the control. And you can see that what their staff needs are, which I also personally believe are modest. So overall, for the department's early detection and rapid response needs, we need an ability to hire on staff rapidly. Right now, when an emergency happens, a new pest comes in, everyone has to drop what they're doing and go respond to it. And most of the time, we don't have the staff. Actually, every time we don't have the staff to dedicate to a full-blown response. We're lucky right now that we have all the staff from the coconut rhinoceros beetle program, because of the federal funding, that when we had coffee berry borer show up here on Oahu, we were able to divert some of our CRB staff to go help out with delimiting and surveys for that. There's also a relatively new fruit fly that we're going to be diverting some of our coconut rhinoceros beetle staff for, but we need to have the ability to bring on those staff within the state, not necessarily through the university, because that's an extra layer of cost. We also, in order to fund this rapid hiring, we need a revolving fund that we can tap into that will be able to grow either through a portion of cargo fees or some other legislative action. And in general, statewide, we need sustained funding for invasive species. So what you all have been doing for the HISC in terms of trying to get them funding that moves into the future, I think is key. And the Department of Ag needs to continue to build their core programs. So we need to fill our vacancies, but we need additional positions on top of that. And that's basically our program in a nutshell.
Great. Thanks, Rob. Questions? Thank you very much. Next is Springer Kay from the Big Island Invasive Species Committee. Springer.
Excuse me. Good morning. I'm Springer Kay, manager of the Big Island Invasive Species Committee. And managers from all the island programs are here today, and we're just really grateful for this event. It's one of our favorites because everyone gets to sit around thinking about invasive species for hours on end, as we always do. And so we really appreciate your patience and interest. I'll try to cover a little bit about who we are and what we do. Some of our successes, our funding outlook for the next couple of years, and our key challenges. So the invasive species committees of Hawaii have a shared vision that biological invasions will no longer threaten the long-term viability of Hawaii's native ecosystems, economy, agriculture, or way of life. It's not to say we're never going to have to deal with invasive species, but that the structures will be in place so that they don't threaten our very existence. Okay, I'm going to do the button. So many programs in Hawaii share a portion of that vision and have worked on invasive species issues for quite a while. But as new threats continue to arrive, gaps were identified. These include gaps in jurisdiction when agencies have partial or conflicting mandates, gaps in resources or human capacity, when information or technology needs to be developed or shared more broadly, and really the big physical and jurisdictional gap between the ports of entry and our protected Malca forests, where high-risk sites, a lot of trade, and corridors right into the forests are found. So the the invasive species committees were formed to help fill those gaps, to work across traditional boundaries, and really help meet the needs of the state for invasive species management. We're led by steering committees that include some of the experts in invasive species and land management, forest protection, and agriculture around the state. Believe it or not, most of the muddy people in this picture are PhDs. And at its simplest, what we do is guided by the steering committee. They tell us what to do and how to do it right. The ISC staff are hired and are out in the field. They're reporting back what they found, what they accomplished, and what else they need to get the job done. But it, of course, gets a little more complicated. The main thing to note here is that a lot of people guide what we do. They provide input and very valuable advice. The staff are, let's see, I have a little pointer here, I believe. The staff are employees of the Pacific Cooperative Studies Unit. That means we're part of the university, which provides a very flexible and unique kind of workforce. We, of course, are reliant on funding that not just provide the resources, but have their own priorities that determine what we do. We work very hard to get the community involved in our decisions. And right over here, the federal, state, and county agencies really determine what we can do. Your bills and appropriations fund our primary funders and advisors, and the decisions that you folks make on bills determine the sort of legal environment that we operate in. So, not surprisingly, the members of the community and businesses that rely on natural resources really do see the impacts to their lives and to their bottom lines from invasive species, and are some of our most valuable partners. That the structure I just showed you has enabled the invasive species committees to meet the needs of our partners in state and local and federal government for nearly 20 years. So what exactly do we do? Most of our work can be grouped into these 5 categories: early detection, rapid response, control of priority species, public outreach and education, and planning and coordination. So Mark earlier kind of showed you the tiers of how things work. We're not heavily necessarily involved in prevention. That's HDOA. We sometimes think of ourselves as the second line of defense in invasive species management. Much of our early detection work involves roadside surveys. We've covered about half of the state highways just in the past year. 50% were surveyed for new invasive pests. We've been doing this for quite some time. In fact, the invasive species committees collectively have identified 1,900 previously unknown plant species on roadside surveys and assessed them for the risk to the environment and agriculture. And these are very cost-effective programs. It's really if something does slip through our prevention programs, going after them early is what makes the difference. I'm sorry, I've completely lost my train of thought on this one. They're cost-effective enough to really attract the attention of outside funders. So we have, on average, a 2-to-1 ratio of outside to state funding for our early detection programs. And then rapid response comes in. You find something and you want to act. And being able to do that quickly makes a difference between this single deer turning into this kind of agricultural nightmare. Our rapid response programs have been responsible for the eradication of 23 species from islands in Hawaii. This could be considered the year of rapid response for all of our partners, but OS alone participated in 178 coconut rhinoceros beetle surveys. And every one of the IST programs traveled to Guam for brown tree snake rapid response training to build our capacity throughout the state. When species get just a few steps ahead of a rapid response, the highest risk individual species become priority targets. So these are require a bit more of a long-term commitment to make sure that they are either contained, controlled, or eradicated. So the IST have 41 field staff working across the state, and just in the past year, surveyed 72,500 acres by air and on foot, treated 135,000 individual plants, and these included the big names: Myconia, albizia, fountain grass, pampas grass, fireweed, and more than 30 other species. If any of those species sounded familiar, it may be a credit to the education and outreach efforts of our programs. ISC staff attended 439 events across the state this year and directly interacted with more than 200,000 people in the community. We work with big groups and small. We train residents and industry. We're seen in print, on TV, heard on the radio, and always seem to find a creative and unique way to get the word out about what to look for and what needs to be done. We're able to spread the word with a lot of confidence. After all, we get our advice from some of the top minds in the state. That's Senator Gabbard there in the front. But increasingly, we're called upon to provide a lot of the planning and coordination for all kinds of entities, whether it's figuring out what to do about albizia in one of the poorest districts in the state, helping private businesses meet increasingly strict weed sanitation standards, providing the mapping, coordination, or documentation of the LFA response effort here in Mililani, helping our state agencies calculate what their future costs are going to be and what they need to be concerned about. We're really working very hard to reduce the future costs of invasive species across the state. So it's a big job, and it's obviously something we don't want to and don't do alone. We rely very heavily on the primary research provided by organizations like the University of Hawaii's CTAR, our extension service, the Department of Agriculture, both state and USDA, and the Hawaii Ant Lab, and many others. Okay. For the past year, our funding was divided about 63% directly from the state and 37% from all other sources. In previous years, it's been a little more balanced, but we really appreciate the extra funding last year that swung this chart a little bit. In the next coming years, we're looking for about 25 to 30% increase in funding. Obviously, as we discussed those very large numbers, there's a long way to go, but that's an increase that can be managed on an annual basis. And a good bit of that needs to go to facilities. If our staff is growing, we do need someplace to put them. So we face a lot of challenges. Some of our daily challenges are really a lot of fun. But it's another way of saying what we need. And I'd like to just sort of work on an analogy with you here. And it's the old just sweeping out the garage analogy. So no matter how much of a mess you already have inside your garage, eventually you do, have to sweep it out. And you've got a lot of tools that you can choose from. You got the trusty old sweep broom. You've got some tiny little detail brooms over there. Hopefully you don't need a rake to clean your garage. But most likely you're going to choose the big, new, nicely tufted push broom. You're going to cover a lot of ground and get the job done. But no matter which tool you choose, you know that the second those big garage doors open, the wind's going to come in and blow in all the leaves and dirt and everything else you're trying to sweep up. So even if it's hot and stuffy and a little dusty in there, you close the garage door before you start sweeping. That's the first task. And when it's shut, it's not a perfect seal. Things are still going to get in there, and you can open it when you need to, but basically you keep it shut as much as you can and open it when you need to go through. So some of our key challenges of the ISC, the things that we think you might be able to help us with, in addition to continuing support for funding for all of these programs, is really shutting the garage doors, and that's improving our inter-island biosecurity. As Amy said, the HGOE has some plans for compliance agreements that can help our local agriculture continue to do business, prevent the movement of pests between islands, build our biosecurity and biocontrol programs, maintain support for local agriculture by setting clear, firm, fair expectations for both private landowners and businesses, and support changes to our noxious pest laws to ensure that no one harbors a pest while state money is being spent to eradicate it somewhere else. Getting that bigger broom, we need to improve the tools to meet detection and response challenges. That means building up those other state programs that develop things like imaging technology, mapping, and pest control research. The University of Hawaii Hilo has an incredible imaging lab, and CTAR is doing great work to help us figure out how to address our problems. And of course, securing stable, cost-effective funding to build human capacity for early detection, rapid response, and control, and ensure adequate, reliable funding for our public education and outreach programs. And that's an investment now to avoid future costs. So just like to sum up, we're the invasive species committees. We're really here to help in whatever capacity we can. We're projects of the Pacific Cooperative Studies Unit at UH Manoa, and we really appreciate your support.
Thank you,
Thank
Springer.
you.
Next, we have Emma Ewan, DLNR, Department of Forestry and Wildlife Natural Area Reserves.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Emma Ewan with Division of Forestry and Wildlife, and here to give you a hopefully surprising new take at ways that invasive species are impacting the health of both the forests but also our people here in Hawaii. And I wanted to give you a new way of framing things that deals with connecting, protecting, and respecting the resources, and how our division is doing that as we look forward to managing our invasive species problem. Starting off globally, we're just this isolated island group in the middle of the Pacific, and this has allowed us to have just a very small amount of native plants and animals being able to colonize our state. But the ones that did had this incredible, spectacular evolution that has created amazing species found nowhere else in the world. And I want to bring up the World Conservation Congress as a testament to how internationally significant these plants and wildlife are, because leaders around the world, this is the Olympics of Conservation that's coming here in 2016, but it's 10,000 or more delegates, leaders that are coming here because they recognize Hawaii is of international significance. These plants and wildlife are of incredible global importance, and thus the invasive species problem is really something the whole world is really caring about, because that's the main threat to these plants and wildlife and our biodiversity. Starting with the makeup of our division, we're part of the Department of Land and Natural Resources and have the kuleana to protect our cultural, historic, and natural resources. The Division of Forestry and Wildlife actually manages a quarter of the entire state land, 1 million acres. We're the oldest forestry management agency in the entire nation because here in Hawaii, we first realized the importance of our forests, which were being impacted by invasive species, and the relationship between the amount of fresh water that we have available in Hawaii. And so before all the other states, we established a forestry management agency that back in 1903 then began controlling invasive species. So it has this century-old roots that we still are part of our top priorities here. So starting off with connection, and we connect people to the resources in so many ways. We have a trail system, mountain biking areas. We have over 900,000 acres of public hunting areas across the state where hunters as stakeholders and partners can go out and have active lifestyles, involve their families, bring home wild meat. We provide koa logs for canoes, for instance, and this is part of a really long-standing cultural tradition that is actually being really impacted by invasive species. There's many bugs that attack koa, and there's even the koa cichlid, which will prevent the koa from forming into a long, straight column tree, and thus not able to be a koa canoe for many hundreds of years in the future when generations to come want to practice this cultural tradition. And so we definitely want to increase the amount of outreach we have through agricultural or athletic events. We have county fairs. We do education, environmental curriculum programs. Very thankful for the media for coming and joining us here, because we really need to share the story of what we are up against and what we're doing here to protect Hawaii with the community in Hawaii. And we also run the Youth Conservation Corps program, which involves hundreds of youth in paid internships that train them in natural resource jobs. We also connect Hawaii to economic opportunities. Many renewable energy projects, development projects, agriculture projects that have conflicts with endangered species need to go through us to create habitat conservation plans, which largely then mitigate through funding invasive species control, because that's the main threats to these endangered species. So by running this program, we allow these projects to go through and create another funding mechanism for invasive species control. So now with protection, I'll start off with our wildfire problem in the state. We have an increasing trend of wildfires in the last couple of decades, and while the state of California, Nevada, all those states have all the media attention, we in Hawaii are actually on par with the percentage of land area burnt. So we are having a major wildfire issue, and certain invasive species like fountain grass are just like matchsticks spreading out there in the forest, easily igniting, creating much hotter and easier to spread fires that make it so much more difficult for us to control them. And so our division is the primary wildland fire responding agency in the state. And so our folks out there that are dealing with the increased droughts and drier conditions with climate change now also have to deal with these invasive forests being so much more of a fuel hazard for fighting these fires. Can't overstate the importance of protecting our native species and how incredibly diverse they are here in Hawaii. We have incredible species like the eevee bird that is a symbol of Hawaii. It's iconic. I mean, it's not just tourism. This is something that we all are proud of and love in Hawaii, unfortunately being considered as a candidate for endangered species. And over 78% of all the extinctions that have happened in the entire nation have been Hawaii species. I'll repeat that. 78% of all the extinctions in the nation have been Hawaii species. It's a really terrible trend. And you can see Hawaii, as compared to all the other states with our plant and wildlife species that are listed as endangered, we have a third of the endangered species here in Hawaii with such a small landmass. Huge problem. And so this, the work that we do, our next presenter will speak a little bit more about the hooved animal control work and the fencing that is part of what we do, but I'll go into a little bit of the multifaceted work that we control, invasive invertebrates, pathogens that affect our forests. We have a major project, a major part of what the Division of Forestry and Wildlife does is control plants that have invaded our native forests as well. And so our crews are out there that target these plants in the very important native protection areas that we have designated. So finally, talking about respect, and I want to remind everyone that the upland forests are traditionally considered the realm of the gods, the Wau Akua. And when these upland forests are invaded and degraded, we really lose their cultural significance and the connection that we have with our past. So, this is because Hawaii's culture and nature are one and the same. Even in the Makai areas where there are no trees, we have impacts from invasive species. These rock formations and heiau and amazing cultural archaeological sites are being toppled over by goats spread out over the landscape, and we're losing this connection to the past again through invasives. And so we also respect the power of nature and natural disasters. We are the managing agency for lots of natural disaster emergency response. And again, the impacts of invasive species really exacerbate our problems. Landslides and flooding exacerbated by Myconia that has shallow roots and doesn't hold the soil like a native forest does. And we all know the story of Hurricane Iselle. Our crews with the division were the major responders, clearing open the roads, making Puna safe again after the hurricane. But I want you to remember that the albizia trees fell down, but the native forest, when we did aerial tours across the island, across the same area, native forest trees stayed up and stayed safe and didn't create a hazard. So we're really having this double threat of climate change and invasive species causing major natural disaster problems. And we're asking the administration to consider our request for $1 million in CIP and $1 million in general funds in order to increase our ability to both get new technologies that allow us to notice and detect new fires or new natural disasters, and then respond to them in a more efficient way. Our infrastructure is really degraded. Our fire trucks are from the 1970s. We really need to ramp up our ability to respond and prepare for these natural disasters that we know are going to come. And that's going to save us a ton of money in the long term when these events happen and we are prepared to fight them and control them. Transitioning to the next speaker, our partnerships are a huge part of what we do, and invasive species control can only be successful in Hawaii with partnerships. We're really happy to say that we've been really innovative with our partners to leverage the limited state funds that we have with county funds, federal funds, private funds that really multiply the effect. I was just looking at our budget before this talk and saw that in some of our programs we have a 10-to-1 state fund to match ratio, and most of our projects are able to get at least 1-to-1 match with this state funds that are enabled. So every dollar that you give us, it really allows us to get a lot more help from our different agencies that get to pool in once we have that initial state investment. So your dollars are definitely going far, especially with our very hardworking crews that we have. These are just shots of the folks out there on the job with the division that are out here basically, working to respect the future. This is, again, about not just us, but about them. And we really need to work hard now in order to make sure that future generations can thrive and be healthy in Hawaii. Mahalo.
Thank you. Next is Jordan Jokio from the Leeward Haleakala Watershed Restoration Partnership. Aloha, Jordan.
Aloha and good morning. My name is Jordan Jokio. I am the program manager for the Leeward Haleakala Watershed Partnership on Maui. Thank you very, very much for this opportunity to speak to you about the very important work and the very important role that watershed partnerships play in statewide invasive species control and management. Before I start my presentation, I was wondering, I'd like to show you a very brief 1-minute public service announcement that Division of Forestry put out.
Beautiful native forests found nowhere else on Earth. These forests play a key role in generating our water supply. The water we use and drink we can't do it because of recent climate changes. Here in Hawaii, we're blessed with beautiful native forests found nowhere else on Earth.
If we can.
These forests play
Send it to us. Thank you.
Okay. Apologize for that little glitch. What I'd like to convey to you very briefly, and I know your time is very valuable and I appreciate the opportunity, is just a couple of things. First, the importance that our watersheds play in our lives and our livelihoods. What we do at Watershed Partnerships to build resiliency in our watersheds. And by resiliency, I mean, to make them strong and healthy to weather the change, the change that they've gone through, as well as the change that we anticipate with a changing climate. And then finally, what some of our needs are to continue this really important work.
How do I do slides?
Okay, so Emma just showed this slide. So this is the footprint of the Watershed Partnership statewide. It's been a very effective mechanism for protecting our watersheds. There's over 2 million acres statewide that are, I guess, kind of somewhat politically corrected, are protected by Watershed Partnerships. That's including 70 landowners, and this is all tiers of government, county, state, and federal. And we're funded by all of those sources, as well as private sources as well. We work very well together to collectively manage with the mutual kind of goal of managing our native forested watersheds. The video that you weren't fortunately able to see does speak to how multi-layered native Hawaiian forests really do maximize water capture and infiltration. It's very, very important to understand this for all of us, because by protecting those things, we do secure the future of our water. A recent study showed that 30 to 50% more water is provided by native forests than forests dominated by invasive species. So this is a native-dominated wet forest, very high quality, probably in the upper elevation of Maui. And you look at that in very stark contrast. This is a Myconia forest from the lower elevation on Maui, and the potential for water infiltration into the ground is significantly compromised. Water, when it rains in this forest, it flows across the ground. The water is oftentimes contaminated, and our water supplies aren't replenished at the rates that I think they need to be. In addition, one of the downslope and other byproducts of increased erosion is you get down. This is the south shore of East Molokai, and when it rains hard there, this is what happens. And so we have these other very important and precious resources to all of us, like these nearshore reefs that get heavily degraded by the heavy loading of silt. So our Mauka work really does connect with watershed work, with Makai work as well. This is an example. This is a place called Oahi on the south slope of Maui, where it's been the site of very active restoration efforts. So the two patches of forest that you see here and here used to look like the area in between, but through the very hard and committed work of people, these forests were rebuilt by hand by directly outplanting in a very aggressive invasive species control project. And what we found, we have ongoing studies, is that water infiltrates down deeper and quicker and at much greater quantities than it does in the adjacent pastures. So the restored forests are doing a much better job of recharging our aquifers. And that's a very important thing, especially for some of these moisture challenged areas like the south slopes of all of our islands. This study was done by the United States Geologic Survey. So they're a very active partner. Again, watersheds, it's not just the mountains that we look at when we drive to and from work. We have a very close relationship with our forested watersheds here in Hawaii. You can see how in close proximity we exist to the resources that sustain us. There's a little bit of talk about, I think Mark Fox touched on this, the important role. There's an economic role, an economic incentive for protecting our watersheds, and that has been quantified in the study. I think it's mentioned in the study that Mark presented to you. It's $7.4 to $14 billion, which is a significant economic metric, I think. In addition, so the funding that the state has provided in fiscal year 14, in terms of economy, there's this whole sense of green jobs, and those are very important jobs, I think, to us here in Hawaii. 156 jobs were created in fiscal year 14 through the support of the state. And there was over $13 million in expenditures by both the Watershed Partnerships and the Invasive Species Committees in fiscal year 14. So that's money, again, that goes right back into our economy. And there's certain things that are very difficult to quantify the value of, and one of those things that Emma and Mark both touched on was the important cultural traditions and other aspects of just what makes life so special in Hawaii. And these things are really priceless. So what we do, I think it's important, to understand what we do as Watershed Partnerships. And to me, the simplest way to divide it up is we do work in the field to actively control and manage invasive species, and I'll get into that briefly. And then we also collaborate with other agencies to work on some of the things that you heard about today. So that's affecting policy, doing outreach, working on education, and other kind of larger, bigger picture management issues. So in the field, what this looks like is spending a lot of time in the ground. I think any crew that's worth its salt does spend quite a bit of time in the field getting to know what its resources are and what the invasive species problems are. Field work includes surveys, detection, control, monitoring, and getting a sense of what your priorities are. And once you have those, rapidly responding to those. We focus our work in Watershed Partnerships on controlling incipient invasive species. So incipient means they're new to this area. They are still in population sizes small enough to manage, and we target those species that that pose the greatest threat, that can alter an ecosystem. This is a gorse infestation on the south slope of Maui, and gorse is a very aggressive non-native weed that impacts watersheds as well as agriculture. So if we don't do this work when it's at this scale, this is kind of what it can turn into. This is the saddle area, Humu'ula on Hawaii Island, and there's thousands of acres that have gorse, and there's a huge campaign being made to remove this, but it's better to control it if you can, when you can. So statewide, the funding that has been provided by the state has contributed to 33,537 acres of invasive species plant control across the state. This is what some of the work looks like. This is Christian Lum, who's going to, I think, speak to you in a little bit. He's a very dedicated field worker on my crew. So one of the other invasive species threat, which is equally as challenging, is feral non-native animals, otherwise known as feral ungulates. It's very well documented the impacts they have on watersheds. It's estimated, So feral ungulates in Hawaii, there's a whole quiver of animals, not just pigs. There's goats, there's mouflon, there's sheep, there's deer, there's cattle, which are not on this slide, and cattle are also very, very destructive. So the annual, this is a nationwide problem with feral animals. Nationwide, there's approximately $1.5 billion cost to manage this issue. I recently got a good statistic from Haleakala Ranch. Just deer alone have done $130,000 in damage by eating the forage that their cows otherwise would have eaten. And that doesn't even include the amount of damage that these deer do to their fences. So the best strategy for managing feral animals, this really aggressive invasive species, is to exclude them from our watershed areas, and so we've been very effective in doing that by building ungulate-proof fences. An important point to note is that these fences are designed to exclude ungulates, but not people. They're built with stepovers in places where people habitually cross them, so that it is a place where people don't have to climb fences. We've tried to facilitate access by people as much as possible. And the results of this kind of invasive species management strategy are profound. You can see it in the slide on the left. You can see it here on Molokai. This is a shot of that Mauka slope that you saw where all that runoff in an earlier slide. In 2009, a small area was fenced to remove the invasive goats. And in just 4 years later, this is what it looks like. And so they've quantified, the USGS has quantified the amount of sediment that has been reduced, and it's profound. I think it was something like it went from greater than 6 tons per acre of sediment that was flowing out of this area in 2009 to less than 2,000 tons per acre.
Go back to the before slide.
So this is before, and this is just 4 years of just excluding ungulates. I don't even think there was an aggressive weed control that took place. So it's greater than 70% vegetation that did recover. And then another example that you may have seen, this is Kaupo Gap on the south slope of Molokai. So to the right is Mauka, that is national parkland. They built that fence, this fence here, several decades ago to exclude animals from this is Kaupo Ranch. And again, look at the recovery. That's just, it's profound recovery. So I think one thing that is difficult, but I think it begs just mentioning, is that in the work that we do in managing feral ungulates, it oftentimes comes into direct conflict with some of our recreational hunting opportunities that I think are very, very important to provide as well. So I just wanted to point out that there is quite a bit of land, 22.8%, close to 25%, that's open to public hunting. The state's and others, planning process is to fence and protect up to, I think, like 20% of this area over the next 15 years. Right now, only 3% is. But what's really important, and I do think that that's important work to do, but I think equally important is and this took, in all honesty, this took me a while to grasp. I grew up on Oahu, and I didn't understand the importance of hunting, but it's important. And I think that we can accommodate hunting by providing increased access, and there's a dedicated effort that the state and others are taking to try to have a parallel process of affecting conservation as well as ensuring that important multicultural, local, contemporary traditions like hunting are perpetuated. Another important thing is in these areas that are protected, we are able to outplant safely and ensure the survivorship of our plants. So last year, statewide, we outplanted over 100,000 native plants onto these landscapes to restore these important watersheds. Some of the people that are involved in this, and I'm wrapping up, that are involved in this, I think, are some of the most important aspects of the work we do. This is Christian Lum, good local guy that has worked very hard, young, very committed and passionate. He will speak to you in a couple of minutes. But these are some of the people that are really getting involved. Robert Lee, he's from Kanaio on the south slope of Maui. And he's the pride that you see in these guys for the work that they do. It's inspiring, I guess. And I'm very fortunate to be working with them. This is Ainoa Kaia'o Kamalia. He's a homesteader out on Department of Hawaiian Homelands in one of our project sites. And then part of this workforce includes volunteers. We're very effective at leveraging not only our dollars, but our effort and our labor. So over 16,000 volunteer hours were created by your funding and your support. Kind of towards closing, one of the things I think that's really important to stress is that treating the management of a watershed is much like treating it as infrastructure, as green infrastructure. So much like, this is a picture of the Waikamai flume that supplies water. It has for almost a century to upcountry Maui and to parts of Kihei. That flume takes dedicated maintenance, management, and funding to keep delivering water. So too does that forest that is one of our project sites for the Watershed Partnerships. That takes maintenance. Equally, that is just important to maintain that. Some of the funding numbers for our goal for protecting our watersheds is to increase from 90,000 to 180,000 acres of protected land in 10 years, and that requires $11 million per year. We've fallen short of that, but I think we've done an excellent job of working towards that goal. One of the things that's really important is we've been especially effective at securing CIP funds, which enables us to expand our conservation footprint. But I think it is important, getting back to that last note, that we do secure money for maintenance and operational costs, because whatever we take on, we need to ensure that we can maintain. See, again, just healthy forest watersheds are our key to supplying fresh water for the long term. And the last slide is, this is widely recognized a long time ago. Emma spoke about this. In 1902, there was a man named E.M. Griffith who was appointed by the U.S. Bureau of Forestry and Agriculture to go and do a study of Hawaii's forest. And this was his conclusion, that forest protection means conserving our water supply. That protection really means invasive species work. So we are continuing and carrying on a long-standing tradition of protecting our water. And I think, I guess, I'm very grateful that you've had this audience, because you're a part of this process of securing this and protecting this for us. So that's all I have, and thank you very much again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Jordan.
Chair,
yes.
May I ask just one question? Thank you. Are you doing any work on Kaho'olawe?
We are not. We did recently volunteer there doing some restoration work, but we're not employed there. There's a dedicated staff that they use volunteer support and interagency collaboration, and we've been part of that effort.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jordan. Next is Brian Nielsen. the aquatic invasive species biologist with DLNR Division of Aquatic Resources. Hello.
Thank you again for your interest in invasive species. So I'm again Brian Nielsen. I'm the Aquatic Invasive Species Coordinator for the Division of Aquatic Resources, and I'm going to be briefing you on the aquatic invasive species issues in Hawaii. So where do the aquatic invasive species come from in Hawaii? So going back to the 1800s, we've seen a steady increase in introductions, and this trend doesn't seem to be slowing down. The main source of these introductions are through the shipping industry. They're transported by ships mainly from what we call whole fouling or biofouling. That's all the stuff that grows on the outside of ships. And then also through ballast water. That's the water that's contained in the ship. And when that's released at ports, it can be another source of introduction. And since shipping is a global network, there's all sorts of opportunities for species to be transported into Hawaii from all over the world. Other introductions have been intentional. Some of the reef fish that we're familiar with have been brought here to increase fishing. And then also aquaculture has been a source of some of the biggest pests that we see on our reefs here in Hawaii. So why is it important to manage invasive species? I think Mark covered this really well earlier, but the economic impacts are profound, not only in terms of the cleanup costs and management that goes into trying to get rid of these pests, but also the effects on property values, tourism. A beach that's full of invasive seaweed that washes up isn't a nice place to sunbathe, nor is a reef that's choked full of invasive algae. That's not a very good place to fish or snorkel. It also has major impacts on our ecosystems. Food security by decreasing fishing can cause public health concerns, and then also the social and cultural values. Our marine and freshwater resources are very important to the Hawaiian way of life, and it can impact that as well. We're also finding that it's important to manage invasive species for climate change. This last summer, I'm not sure if you saw in some of the headlines, we had the largest coral bleaching event in documented Hawaiian history. So we're finding that we need to have resilient reefs free of invasive species so they're in a healthy state to be able to resist some of these changes that we're going to see in the future. Scientists are predicting that these events are going to be more common and more severe in the future. So the Aquatic Invasive Species Program has three main focus areas. First is prevention, rapid response, and management and control. Also add that the Division of Aquatic Resources has a brand new civil service aquatic invasive species team. In the past, this was contracted out, but now we have a permanent 6-member staff, including myself, just dedicated to aquatic invasive species. So our main project with the team is the invasive algae control project out in Kaneohe Bay, also known as the Super Sucker Project. So with this issue, an invasive algae was introduced back in the 1970s to Kaneohe. Since then, it's spread throughout the bay, and it grows over the reefs and smothers the coral and then actually kills the coral. So we're trying to reclaim these reefs by going down with a dive team in an underwater vacuum system called the Super Sucker, and we hand remove the algae with help from our partners from the Nature Conservancy. And then once the bulk of the algae is removed, we bring in a native sea urchin, which is a biocontrol agent, the collector sea urchin, and then we outplant those to the reef, and they graze any remaining algae that's left on the reef and then also keep it from growing back. So then the coral is able to recolonize the native limu, and then the ecosystem can be restored. This has been a really successful project. We've cleared over 13 acres of reef so far in Kaneohe Bay and outplanted over 250,000 sea urchins raised from the hatchery at Sand Island. Rapid response is also a vital component to our program. So any reports of pests, we respond to those to make sure we can get rid of them before they have a chance to establish and spread. This is particularly important with marine debris. We saw this back in 2013 when Japanese tsunami debris was landing on our shorelines here, and a lot of that tsunami debris did have foreign organisms attached to it. So our team with our other partners responded to those debris calls and got them out of the water as soon as we could. Also, in terms of rapid response, is early detection. So the more eyes you have out looking for pests and other things that don't belong here, the more chance you're going to have to respond and eliminate that threat. So we've teamed up with the Eyes of the Reef program. This is a citizen science program that focuses on recruiting community members that are in the water a lot, so scuba divers, spear fishermen, swimmers, and then they train them on what pests to be on the lookout for, also coral diseases or other threats to reefs, and then they can report those to us, and so we can respond. So it really increases our capacity to identify pests out in the field. The ballast water and hole fouling aspect of our program is also very important, considering that the shipping industry is the main source of introductions to Hawaii. And so this program is more on the prevention side in terms of setting rules and regulations, and then also data gathering with the shipping industry. So the goals of this program are to update our ballast water rules. So there is currently rules on the books that govern where you can release your ballast water in Hawaii, but those need to be updated to be more consistent with maritime rules and the U.S. Coast Guard. Also, we want cleaner ships coming into Hawaii and leaving Hawaii to reduce that chance of introduction. So we're also looking into a biofouling rule. But we also want to keep an eye on how those ships are cleaned. One of the processes for cleaning ships is called in-water cleaning. As you can imagine, that could be a major source of dislodging foreign organisms into our ports here. So we also want to look more into that. So progress in terms of this program made so far for biofouling, we've just completed a data gathering process and are drafting some policy recommendations and consulting with the shipping industry this year in 2015. For in-water cleaning, we're consulting with the industry and then also collecting some baseline information to get an idea of what kind of in-water cleaning practices are done currently here in Hawaii. And then ballast water, the AG has approved a Ramsayer draft that's ready for submission to the Board of Land and Natural Resources. And then we've just hired a new CGAPS legal fellow that's going to be pursuing some of these projects with his legal expertise. So support for this program, in terms of the ballast water administrative rules, those need to be amended. The in-water cleaning policy development that we're working on. Biofouling rule development and implementation. We're also looking at a cost recovery program via inspection fees that would help fund this program. And then also creating long-term capacity for the ballast water and biofouling coordinator. This is currently a contracted position off grants, and given the importance, we feel that we need a permanent person in this position. Additional program needs, continued support for the aquatic invasive species program into the future, and then also increased capacity for work on the outer islands. Since our team is based on Oahu, we tend to have Oahu-centric work given the travel costs, but there is aquatic invasive species issues on the outer islands as well that need attention and capacity for things like rapid response. There's a growing gorilla ogo problem in Molokai. That's another invasive seaweed. It's taking over their shorelines. Hypnea, another seaweed in Maui, and invasive mullet on Big Island. That's just to name a few. Also, in terms of prevention, support a policy regulating the sale and distribution of aquatic invasive species, and then also looking into regulating aquaculture to keep away any more introductions that might be brought over. With that, mahalo again, and thank you for your interest. I'd like to also invite any of you to come visit the Sea Hatchery or come take a trip on the Super Sucker if you want to get a first-hand look at what we do. Mahalo.
Thank you very much, Brian. Next up is we're going to move into state biocontrol initiatives. Darcy Oishi with the chief of the DOA's Plant Industry Division Biological Control Branch.
Thank you, Senator Gabbard and Rep. Lee, and goodbye, Rep. Thielen.
Don't take it personal.
I won't. I've decided to give you all a rest from turning your head to one side and not have a PowerPoint.
You mean we have to look at you?
Yes, I'm vain that way, and I want all eyes on me. I'm fortunate enough to be in charge of the oldest program here in this room. Over 125 years, there's been a biological control program in Hawaii. And we're at a critical juncture. But before I move, I want to do something very different. I'd like everyone to close their eyes. But don't fall asleep, because we do have cameras still going, and it would be a shame if we heard you snoring. So I want you to picture the natural area that you like to go to, the natural environment that you like to go to. And I'm going to go back to Senator Gabbard's question early on to Mark about what is it going to be like in 10 to 20, maybe even 50 years. So I want you to picture that. Hold it in your mind. And now, Rob Curtis mentioned in his talk that the department goes through a decision-making process. The department isn't the only one that goes through the decision-making process. The legislature goes through a decision-making process by deciding how much money they're going to give for invasive species programs. So that could be, like last year, $5 million. Or this year, it could be, hopefully not, $0. And that's the decision that you can make. Now, imagine if the decision is not to fund the programs. What are we going to see? If it's during the day, it's probably going to be very quiet. Why? Because likely at this point, coqui frog is going to be widespread and the insects will be gone. The birds that utilize those insects are going to be gone. If you open your eyes, not in this world that you're imagining, there are probably going to be, if there's a palm tree, there's probably going to be damage from coconut rhinoceros beetle. You probably aren't going to be having a nice time because you're getting bit by something. It could be little fire ants. It could be biting sandflies. The whole landscape will have changed. You'll probably be seeing only one kind of plant. It might be strawberry guava. It might be albizia. It might be African tulip. Or it could be something else that we don't have yet. Macania, mile a minute. So the scene could be very different if we do not fund programs. So I'm being very altruistic now because I'm promoting everybody. But I'm going to switch now to promoting myself. Now imagine, Rep. Lee and Senator Gabbard, if you decided to fund my facility and my biocontrol program, and it's named after you because you initiated it. And there's going to be a wing, of course, named after me. What could we see? We've got long-standing problems that we've all been talking about, like Myconia. We've been talking about that for years. Jordan brought up gorse. That's been another long-standing problem. We could actually be working towards solutions. I'll also throw in albizia. Why? Why do we need a new facility for this kind of things? Let's go to albizia. Albizia grows really fast, and a biocontrol program on a tree takes a long time to work on. So we're talking one test on one organism might take, one batch of tests might take 2 or 3 years, optimistically. In that time, we could have a tree that's 2 stories tall. So how am I going to be doing that without the Senator Mike Gabbard biocontrol facility? It's going to be very difficult to do that. If not impossible, especially if you don't have the Representative Chris Lee nursery wing to go along with it. And we need all of these factors in order to do the biocontrol work. And I can't even think about what the name of the wing, what wing would be named after me, so I won't go there. For some reason, I keep thinking of the bathroom. But this is the kind of situation that we're at now, that I have a 125-year history of that I'm the inheritor of biological control, and we've had some great successes in the recent past. Stinging nettle caterpillar isn't going to factor into your imagination of what happens in your pristine environment because we took care of it with a wasp that likes to slowly munch through the tissue and then forms a nice little cocoon and then bursts out of the belly when they're all done and mature. Kind of like a scene. Yes, it is. The alien from Alien was ripped off from entomologists who do biological control work, and we didn't get credit for it. Probably because, and also when you do the imaginations, there's no mongoose because we didn't do that. And so there's a long history of successful projects, but we've reached a juncture where we need more in order to be more effective. Right now, my presence here today represents a cut in the biocontrol staff of about 1/11 of the work that can be done because that's what I represent. That fraction of the staff is left. I have vacant positions that we need to fill. And actually, in order to really properly do the work in the facility that's named after you, which will probably cost about $35 million and house the University of Hawaii, our ARS partners, and the Forest Service to do excellent work to control basically the pests that what the rest of this group in here cannot work on. Although I guess we would need an underwater facility if we were to help out DAR. But I'd be happy to do that too. That's kind of what I have to say. And I'd be happy to answer questions.
35 million? Is that all you need?
35 million, yeah.
Not this year.
But I do need first a feasibility study to identify a location, and then subsequent year the design budget, but biocontrol is the most affordable long-term solution, and it has the smallest impact on the environment since most of our control programs do involve the use of chemicals or just hard labor in places that we cannot get to.
Thank you, Darcy.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're running a little bit behind schedule, but now we're going to have a wrap-up by Josh Atwood and also Christian Lum, who is a field technician with the Leeward Haleakala Watershed Recovery Partnership.
Thank you, chairs. I'm going to be really brief, and Christian can come up now if he wants.
Christian, come up, yeah.
I'll be really brief. I want to respect your time, and a lot of the things that I'm going to say have been mentioned earlier. So, first of all, invasive species work in Hawaii is really cost-effective in this graph, which is also in our ledge report, so you can review it in more detail later. Some of the estimated damages or costs of invasive species, this is just a handful of examples. Brown tree snake, $2.14 billion annually in lost tourism and damage to electrical infrastructure, as well as health costs. $672 million in damages from Myconia, estimated on an annual basis from lost groundwater recharge and lost native bird habitat. $200 million annually is the estimated impact of red imported fire ant if it were to come to Hawaii in terms of agricultural costs and health impacts. And $194 million annually is the current estimated impact from little fire ant for Hawaii County only. This study was completed before we found that little fire ant has been moving statewide. And that's in health costs as well as losses to agriculture and nurseries. Compared to that, the $50 million estimate from LRB in 2002 for what the statewide prevention and control cost is, and then so small you can't even see it on this graph, is the FY 16-17 HISC request for $6 million annually. So zooming in on that, there's the $50 million again all the way on the left. The average appropriation from FY 5 to 14 was $1.2 million. FY15, thank you again. That was really, for lack of a better term, watershed year for us because we were finally able to support a lot of these projects at a more appropriate level. So we're just looking to maintain that capacity. And this, of course, is for the interagency HISC requests only. the core programs that we talked about at the start of this in terms of prevention and watershed and forestry management that are funded by other general fund appropriations or the barrel tax, the cargo fee, the conveyance tax. Those are additional really priority needs going into the future. So I know the admin package is still being finalized, and of course legislators are still determining what they're going to introduce this year. But these are some of the issues that I would anticipate might come before you this year for legislative action. Of course, maintaining and expanding some of the core programs that we talked about at the various agencies connected to invasive species. That includes the vector control worker positions we talked about, general fund appropriations to the HISC, to the Division of Forestry and Wildlife, increasing that natural area reserve fund ceiling so that we can better make use of the great conveyance tax revenues we've seen recently. Different allocations of the barrel tax to biosecurity functions, clean energy, and environmental response under HDOA, DBET, and DOH. And department-wide focus of biosecurity at the Department of Agriculture and the compliance program that Amy mentioned, and also the LRB study update that we've talked about. So that's kind of what I anticipate might be on the horizon for this ledge session. I want to thank you for your time and for your attention to this issue, and to kind of close out the whole session and talk about why this is important to actual people and not just government bureaucrats like myself. Christian Lum from Leeward Haleakala Watershed Restoration Partnership, who works with Jordan, who you heard from earlier.
Yeah, like he said, my name is Christian Lum, and just here to share, I guess, a little about myself and what I do. As like he said, I work with the Jordan guys and their crew, and I wanted to share like the importance of what I do is why it's important to me. And I dance hula, and in hula, a lot of the plants that we protect, as you guys probably know, we use a lot of them for like implements or anything really, any type of resource. But I just wanted to share. Sorry, I'm nervous.
Just relax. Relax, Christian. You're amongst friends.
Pretty much. It's important to take care of invasive species, and the crews that I've got to work with in the past, they really they have a passion for what they do. And I go there and they're like, yeah, let's take care of these invasive plants, let's kill them. You know, for me especially, I feel like when I go out into the field, it's like, all right, what am I getting today? What am I getting today? Is it an ATF? I don't know, hopefully. But it's that kind of mentality that makes me feel good about what I do. And, you know, it's for the generations to come down the line. And as a hula student, I feel like it's my obligation or like a responsibility to take care of the plants, and it's for the next generation down the line, and hopefully they can use those resources that I've used and I've learned from. And I just wanted to mahalo for the support, and hopefully it gets a little bigger so more guys like me can go out in the mountain and learn. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Thank you, Christian.
Yeah.
Thank you for your care, for your passion about what you do. It's very, very important. And thank you all again for what you all do. Speaking for myself, and I know Chris will agree with me, that we'll do our best on our end. But we need your support as well to get the word out, to continue to raise awareness out there in the public as far as the important work that you do. All the presentations are available on the hearing notice for those of you. Hopefully you are all taking notes to that. But they're all there. And again, thank you very much for coming. Bruce?
No, it's just a big mahalo we wanted to send out because it's not what we do here, but what you guys do out there that makes the difference. So really appreciate it. Really appreciate it. And we'll do what we can.
Yeah. Okay, aloha. Mahalo.